Hey guys, what's happening? So we're about to get into some much requested talk about Punisher War Machine in Marvel Legacy. And I gotta tell you guys, like, Marvel Legacy as a whole is just so much more than what I expected, because there are so many things connecting and not necessarily directly, and most of it's pretty direct connections in my opinion. But with Punisher War Machine having a lot of Thunderbolts and Secret Empire references that just jump out left and right, and it really gets me excited about what's around the corner for this Punisher. And now that we're finally on the subject of this Punisher, I can get into a few more of the reasons of why he needs to meet Cosmic Ghost Rider. Because in Marvel Legacy you have the Punisher and you also have Cosmic Ghost Rider. And we've talked about on the Cosmic Ghost Rider playlist on how he's Frank Castle from the future, traveled back to an alternate past. But on the other hand, with the Punisher in the Prime universe, in Marvel Legacy, with it pulling so much from Thunderbolts and Secret Empire, and I'll get more specific about all that in just a minute, but with it pulling so heavily from Thunderbolts specifically, it just takes me back to the Punisher when he went up against Ghost Rider, and when Ghost Rider gave Frank the pen and stare, nothing happened. And it's not necessarily because Frank has no regrets, but it's because he hasn't shed innocent blood. And because he hasn't shed innocent blood, there's no suffering for him to share as a result. And it really makes you think for a second, like, all the dudes that Punisher has taken out, none of them were innocent. Like, none of them were like, man, I really don't want to do this first day. Like, they all just been bad. But either way, so fast forward into Marvel Legacy, when we pick up with Punisher, who in Marvel Legacy looks just like Jon Bernthal. And as far as I'm concerned, he is the definitive on-screen Punisher, and don't let nobody tell you different. But what ends up happening is Nick Fury sneaks into the Punisher's van, which, first of all, isn't smart, but he knows enough about Frank to know that he would identify the target before just doing anything brash. But the thing is, Fury is here because he needs Frank to do what Frank does best, and he does have a mission that he needs Frank to go on. But Fury's intentions run much deeper than that, because Fury knows after how Secret Empire went down, Frank is not going to side with S.H.I.E.L.D., or at least not easily, because Frank had already been fooled by Hydra Supreme. And with evil Steve Rogers using Frank and telling him that he'll use the Cosmic Cube to get his children and his family back, that's how Hydra Supreme pulled him in. And by mentioning children first is the same way that Fury pulls in Frank for this job. And the immediate situation is Armand Petrov, who had risen through ranks with the Chernian army, in a matter of days started turning Cherny on his head. He used the military to oust the president, and he was taking out whoever he felt like he needed to in order to, quote, restore Chernia, which included children, civilians, leaders, it didn't matter. And so when S.H.I.E.L.D. sent in men who have their versions of the War Machine suit, not exactly the suit, the select group ended up turning sides and they began working for Petrov. And so Frank Castle ended up accepting this mission from Nick Fury. One, because innocent children were involved, and anytime we talked about Punisher, like, that is his one thing. But also, part of Nick Fury's setup here was to get Frank's hands on the War Machine suit. And it's funny because for whatever reason, Nick Fury thinks that by calling in this favor from Frank, and by way of giving him this intel, pretty much handing him the War Machine suit, that he'll be able to use Frank as like an asset. Because literally, Nick Fury could have called anybody else to go get this suit, but he did not do that. He called Frank Castle. And the look on Frank's face when he sees that thing, he's like, oh man, y'all done messed up now. And he's right, because first order of business is start a nuclear war. And I'm joking, but I'm kind of not. Because Frank goes through and he starts cleaning out Petrov's men, and somewhat learning the suit in the process. And at this point, not really getting to the place of mastering it, but enough to be effective. Because his mission, not necessarily Fury's, but his mission is to clean these guys out and free all the prisoners. Which he does, but this is the Punisher now. So he's not just shooting every one of these guys, but he's using flamethrowers. He's punishing. And the way that he takes out a lot of these guys is by unconventional means, and in some cases very inefficient, because like one dude, he just flew him up to the maximum safe altitude and just let him go. Not because it's part of the mission, not because it's the only way to kill him, because it's the Punisher. And I'm talking about the same guy who took a dude's face, like earlier on in the series, took a dude's face with a bear trap, which is not very efficient, but when you're the Punisher, you get plenty of style points for that. Like, achievement unlocked. But after getting through so many of these soldiers without the armor, armor. He eventually is met with the other former S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who also have Stark Tech suits, which they never return to S.H.I.E.L.D. They outnumber him, and because they're more efficient with the suits, the AI informs him that he only has a 3% chance of winning in a frontal assault. And I love the interaction between Frank and the AI of the War Machine suit, because he really doesn't care. Because he asks the suit, like, what's my chance of just taking out this guy? And the suit's like 22%. He's like, I'll take it. And he just falcon punches dude in the face at full functional power. But because he has taken so much damage, while getting away his suit crashes in the water, which helps in a way because at this point they think he's dead, but at the same time the suit is like trashed. And I wouldn't say completely trashed, but it needs service and it needs repairing before he can go back in. And so when Frank makes his way back into one of the bases, and what Frank does when he gets there is he commandeers the services of one of their scientists, or engineers better yet, and gets them to fix it. But initially he had dragged another S.H.I.E.L.D. agent in there to do it, but when he called Fury, he's like, oh nah, he a traitor too. And he knew, he can't fix that. And Frank just takes him out immediately. And I ain't gonna front, like, even if I was the next guy and I couldn't fix it, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll get you right up and running, man. Like, okay, let me get the electromagnetic system, connect that to the antibiotic. All right, we're looking good. We're getting photosynthesis here. Here we go. But the other engineer, he gets it running, and Frank is able to continue his search with the suit for Petrov. Because since Frank has been running through Petrov's ranks left and right, he's gone into hiding. But when Petrov announces that he's gonna launch a nuke in retaliation unless Frank leaves, then Fury tells Frank, you gotta get out of there. And what we get is Frank obeying an order from Nick Fury for like 2 seconds. But this was part of Frank's plan. He knew that if he caused enough trouble and took out enough men, then Petrov would rally what he had or make some type of drastic call that would give up his location. And the Punisher, when he gets there, he makes an entrance. And not just any entrance, but a War Machine entrance. Because he drops a tank on these dudes' heads and he's like, boom, you looking for this? But Rhodey dropped it at their feet, so it's not exactly the same thing. But speaking of Rhodey, I do want to mention right here that the last time that he was seen, at least to Frank and many others, was back in Civil War II, after Thanos had kind of like, now he Falcon punched him. No pun intended with Falcon Captain America being at the funeral and everything, but that's very important to the narrative because it starts to answer the question of where is Rhodey, or what happened to Rhodey during the time of this narrative. Because for a lot of people who don't know that, it takes away from the story's full arc. But once again, that's one of the many callbacks that I love about this story arc, because it stays faithful to a lot of the events that happened prior to. But when Frank finally finds Petrov, like, this is one of the moments where I really feel like we need to get a Samuel Jackson and John Brenthal like in a film together. Because when Petrov finds himself cornered and he launches this nuke, Frank, who at this point is going against Fury's orders, he asks for Fury's advice, and Fury, his response is just priceless. But what ends up happening is Frank destroys the thrusters for the nuke and keeps the warhead intact. And he gives the former agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. an ultimatum to take off their armor or he's gonna drop the warhead. And because Fury knows he's not bluffing, he makes the decision for these two idiots and he detonates the EMP, disabling everyone's armor, really just leaving the three of them to duke it out. And this couldn't be a worse situation for these two, because even without the armor, he is still the Punisher. And as dangerous as he was with the armor, with all those weapons at his disposal, like with all those soldiers he killed with the armor, that was like amateur night. And now that he's forced to take it off, it's really like that question from Avengers 1, like, take away the suit and what are you? Because under the suit, this guy's still the Punisher, and he will beat you to death with a rock and your own knife. And when Petrov comes out from his bunker wearing his own suit, because Frank had spent so much time with the suit, and I mean by having hours of more experience in it, and being in the suit while it's sustaining damage and seeing what goes first, and on top of that, literally seeing it put together again. But because of this, Frank's able to pick him apart in the suit, weak point by weak point, until finally taking out the arc reactor, in which he uses the repulsor blast for himself in order to break his fall, leaving Petrov in the good graces of gravity to figure it out on his own. But the thing is, after all of this is said and done, Frank just takes the War Machine armor, goes back to the US, and picks up where he left off. And for the most part, he's taking on like your street level criminals like before, like taking on Bullseye and I want to say Rhino as well. But the thing with Frank usually operating at this level, like S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Avengers, they never really went after him because the damage he would cause was minimal. It was like on a street level. But now that he has the War Machine suit, all of that has changed, because now his limitations aren't what they used to be. And as a result, Captain Marvel is the first to go after him to commandeer the suit. But the reason why this is a big deal, and there's a number of reasons, but the main reason is that this dude could single-handedly start World War III. And so for Captain Marvel coming to him to get the suit back, she's not necessarily being a party pooper, she's just working in the nation's best interest. And so of course Frank is not able to defeat Captain Marvel, but he is able to make a diversion in order for himself to escape. And as a result, he ends up leaving on foot because it wouldn't make sense to fly because Captain Marvel is way faster. But as far as getting into one of the reasons why Frank kept the suit, and this is one of the things we start to explore when he's approached by Daredevil. And Frank just brushes him off in the worst way. And it's so disrespectful because he slaps Daredevil's hand off of his shoulder, which gets him a baton to the back of the head and just says, "We're not in the same league anymore," and just blasts him into some boxes, man. Like I had to do it. And that disrespect doesn't just stop with Daredevil, but it carries on to every character who you would consider in that Punisher class. And I would say that he feels that way mostly about any of the heroes who don't have like your extraordinary powers. But similar to him, they have a particular skill set. And much like your Hawkeye, who I still wouldn't put in the same category as your regular Punisher. And I mean that with the utmost respect, because Clint Barton is just not Frank Castle. But what I mean by the same class is just characters without superpowers. But as far as Clint, who is staking out the confrontation between Punisher and Captain Marvel, he's able to hit Frank with a tracker, only to have Frank turn back around and give him 3 more words of disrespect, because the punishment isn't just physical, but it's verbal, man. And he takes his pizza in the process. Disrespect for the kill. But when he gets back to one of his safe houses, he's removed the arrow at this point, and not so much aware that it was a tracker, and I'm not so much sure if he wasn't aware or he just didn't care, because Frank has a number of safe houses he can jump in and out of all over the city. But because Clint was able to place a tracker on him, this ended up leading to the Avengers knowing where he was at. And oh my god, it's Hercules! That was for a special somebody in the comments. You know who you are. And I will be looking for your comment just to pin it up top in the comment section. Unless you say don't pin this, then I won't. But either way, the fight that takes place here is crazy, because it's like your airport battle in a studio apartment. But at the same time, this fight isn't meant to, or Frank isn't necessarily trying to take out the Avengers. He's really just trying to make enough room for himself to get out of there. And this is one of just many examples of Frank Castle just being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And not just in combat, but in preparation and mission execution. Regardless of how ridiculous it may look, Frank Castle is out here making it happen. And trust me, even when he's seen, he's getting the side eye, like taking the subway, dude. But the plan is brilliant because it sends Captain Marvel and everyone else back to square one. Your latest intel will only lead you to where he's been, and in most cases 4 to 6 steps behind him having been there and gone somewhere else. But as this continues, it leads to a couple things. One, Frank needing the suit to get repaired again and having the tracker removed from it, but also unfolding a much deeper plot because Frank Castle is on the road to redemption. And I only mean as far back as Secret Empire. Like, he's not sorry about anything else. Not before that. It all starts and ends at Secret Empire. But once he's patched up from his battle with the Avengers, which also was another reminder for him of choosing the wrong side in Secret Empire. But once he's patched up, he's heading to the CIA headquarters in order to get the location of Hydra Supreme. Because for Frank, eliminating Hydra Supreme Steve Rogers, in his perspective, that would right his wrongs. And not necessarily saying that he'll want to give the suit back after that, but he'll feel better at the end of the day. But when he gets to the CIA headquarters, nobody really knows that he's on his way there. So there's like the precautions or the countermeasures to stop him from getting through. They're completely useless because he gets through, he gets all the information he wants on Hydra and gets out just like that. But the crazy thing is, Baron Zemo is notified when Frank Castle is on his way to him. And Zemo isn't shaken in the least bit. And unlike many others who flee this location, he doesn't. And if I had to guess why, it would be because Ghost is here with him. And I'll leave a link down in the description for the origin of Ghost, because the Ghost in the comics is a lot different than the Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And seeing him back here with many others from Secret Empire and his character ties going back to Thunderbolts, it's just another one of those reasons why I could see Punisher in Marvel Legacy bringing back a lot more from that series. But essentially with Ghost being able to phase through objects and be able to hack anything by just touching it. And also because the War Machine armor did not get the Ghost upgrade upgrade that the Iron Man armor got, like we talked about in the Ghost origin video. But Ghost is able to get Frank out of the armor, but seconds before Crossbones can go for the kill, more of the heroes show up. And they're there seemingly under Fury's orders to take Frank in, but after Zemo and Ghost get away, we find out that Widow and Bucky have plans of their own. And this really takes me back to Secret Empire where, and I almost feel like I've been saying Secret Invasion this whole time, but this takes me back to Secret Empire where Black Widow died at the hands of Hydra's Supreme Captain America just moments after a brutal fight with the Punisher. And I also gotta say, like, a good story about how she came back would have to be Tales of Suspense featuring Hawkeye and the Winter Soldier, because it really gets into them figuring out, is she still alive? And I'm not gonna front, like the first time I read the whole series, I still thought she was dead. Like, she is that good. But on top of giving that explanation and actually revisiting the Red Room, it also shined more light on and gave us this answer to like this silent love triangle between Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Bucky. And it's a really good character story. I may do a spill on it when we get more information about the Black Widow film, or if you guys want, just let me know in the comments or just hit me on Twitter and we'll do it earlier than that. But deviating from Fury's plans, this is Widow's idea, because her and Bucky want to kill Hydra Supreme Steve Rogers as well, and probably a little more than anyone else. And because they have all the intel on Hydra, and I don't remember if Bucky and Widow already knew, but well, they have the information since Frank took and got everything, but they definitely know at this point that he is being held at Shadow Pillar, which is a black site offshore maximum prison. And not offshore, but off soil, like not in America. Make sure I correct that, because when I say offshore, people are like, you in the water, you mean the raft? Nah, there's something different. But because they know where he's at and they're all on the same page as far as they want to take him out, they tolerate Frank using the War Machine armor and they ally with him because ultimately all three of them want the same thing. And for the record, just to better paint the picture of the dynamic between these three, like between Punisher and Widow, like there's this respect of he's sorry for what he's done, but that's not at all the case with Bucky. Like Bucky gets the same disrespect as anybody else back in that class category we was talking about, because Frank makes all kind of smart remarks, like, and I don't even think it has anything to do with the armor, but he makes smart remarks about Bucky having the techno-organic virus, and Bucky's like, you think I'm Cable? But then when Frank makes a Soviet remark, Bucky's like, wait a minute, you know who I am. Just making the disrespect dig even deeper. And that right there is just Frank Castle being Frank Castle. And so I gotta say, like, the biggest thing that this is pulling from as a reference to Secret Empire, and not even so much the biggest thing, but the most recent, is Secret Empire Omega, where once again, after the events of Secret Empire, we see the Punisher, we see Bucky, we see Widow's funeral, and the Punisher now in Marvel Legacy is building on top of all of that, along with the story of Tales from Suspense, where Widow came back and now they're all together here to finish the job. And so when they get to Shadow Pillar, and keep in mind, when they break into this prison, there are a lot of inmates here that they put there. And Frank says that most of them are because of him, but due to the fact that he doesn't really let people live, I kind of doubt that. We might need a recount on that. But after getting the information from the guards and heading to Hydra Supreme's cell, one of the inmates just yells out, "Hey, War Machine!" And Frank just incinerates him and is like, dang bro, you could have fooled me. I mean, you're wearing the exact same suit. Like, if I was breaking in the prison with him, I'd be like, hey man, you could have let that go. That was an honest mistake. Like really, you were turned to the side, he couldn't see the skull, like he didn't know. But because Zemo had made it there first and was using more stealthy tactics, he then reveals at this point, like over the intercom, that he's opening all the cells and shutting off the inmates' power inhibitors, which causes like a crazy brawl and is really too much for Widow and Bucky. So he tosses them up top to keep them safe. And lo and behold, they land in the arms of Hercules and the Avengers. But at this point, Zemo, who had released the prisoners as a form of a distraction, he's not worried about it because he's here to get Hydra Supreme. And Bucky and Widow at this point, they're pinned down so they can't get out from the Avengers, so they radio Frank like, you have to stop him. But on Frank's way out, he runs into Iron Man. And for Stark, much like everyone else, at this point, the last he remembers Frank is as the Frank Castle who was working for Hydra. And for all Tony knows, Frank is trying to help break out Hydra Supreme. And for Frank, who's in a crunch for time right now because he doesn't want to let him get away, he tells this to Tony, but Tony's like, okay, yeah, but you're still a serial killer. And you don't deserve to even look at Rhodey's suit. But what Tony is missing here is the same thing that Fury understood from the beginning. And it all plays back into the reason that Fury called Frank Castle and not Iron Man or not any of the other Avengers to get the War Machine armor. And that's really because all along, Fury knew that Frank was on a one-man mission to eradicate Hydra, which is why he broke into the van to lure Frank into this plan to begin with. But he also made the mistake of thinking that he could control Frank, who ended up keeping the suit after the first mission. But either way, Frank pretty much sets the hallway on fire, like right under the gas pipe, so Iron Man has to go in and save the people in the prison, which Frank knows he can do, but he's just trying to buy a window of time. But real quick, just on the subject of Fury's plans for Frank and why this didn't work with Frank, according to his words. Because on the way to Shadow Pillar, the Black Site prison, Frank told both Bucky and Widow that he doesn't agree with what they do, working for S.H.I.E.L.D., being spies, quote unquote, because at the end of the day, they're just being used. And from Frank's perspective, he sees any of them like puppets, just carrying out whatever mission and not necessarily knowing what the end game or the outcome is playing towards, but rather doing what they're told for whatever reason that they're told, which couldn't be any different from Frank, who always plays by his own rules, even when it seemed like he was working for Fury. Because much like he told Matt Murdock, having this armor, it's a means of taking this to a next level. And Frank looked at the opportunity of taking the armor to expand his purpose rather than just use it and work for somebody else. And it makes sense because a lot of the time, the things that Frank is willing to do and the guys that he takes out, a lot of the time, they're villains that don't even see the light of day. I'm talking about like first appearance and last appearance, Punisher. Like, this guy ain't about the bad guy coming back for a sequel. Like, he ain't about that. But as far as creating a distraction for Tony Stark and catching up to the chopper where Hydra Supreme was in, he effectively disables it, but then once again, he's got to deal with Ghost. And I'm gonna tell you right now, like, Frank Castle is not the guy that you want to allow to make it to round 2. Because as far as he's concerned, round 1 was study hour. And you may best him in round 1, but when it gets to round 2, it's execution time, or electrocution time, in the case of Ghost. And Frank's able to put him out by picking up a loose cable from the chopper and just electrocuting himself, which the suit can take, but anybody else touching it, not so much. But when it comes to getting Frank out of the suit, Tony comes back, they throw hands for a while, but Tony still can't do it. He can't get Frank out of the suit. And when Tony fails to do this, Frank is confronted by the Manticore weaponized vehicle. And no, this is not a DLC from GTA Online. Like, you can't call your mechanic and get one of these. But long story short, this is a vehicle that was designed by Braintronics, which is a company who was also stealing tech from Tony Stark, much like what we talked about in The Hunt for Wolverine not too long ago. But the Manticore vehicle was being piloted by Colonel James Rhodes. And I'm gonna tell you guys right now, like, this was just a brilliant way to end this run. Because all Rhodey has to do at this point is ask him to take it off and it's done. Because much like in Secret Empire, where Frank trusted Captain America, or Hydra Supreme in that case, he trusts, admires, and respects the fellow soldier. Anyone else is 50-50. But that's why when Rhodey tells him, that suit is my legacy. I've sacrificed and given a lot in that suit, which gives even more to the reason why Tony, before he brought back Rhodey from the dead, and even after, like, the ties to that suit are super emotional for him, and really for the both of them. And just as a little backstory for how Rhodey came back and why he's not wearing the suit, after the events of Civil War II, after Thanos literally punched a hole in him, Rhodey was traumatized from dying so violently in that suit that he didn't want to wear it. And with chasing down a villain named Gauntlet from Braintronics, I almost said Plantronics, different company, but with chasing down Gauntlet, his mind was taken back to that traumatization of being killed or destroyed in the suit. And the dude's name was Gauntlet, for crying out loud. Like, when I say Gauntlet, who you thinking of? Not this guy. But just the idea of being punched so hard that the suit couldn't handle it. This terrified Rhodey. And so in Invincible Iron Man, think number 600, much like with Tony, with him instead of dying just went into a coma and his suit rebooted his body, Tony Stark made similar modifications in order to bring Rhodey back. And for a short while he did return as War Machine, but after the run-in with Gauntlet, he hung up the armor because that close range of impact for any kind of protection, for him it just wasn't enough. Not after that. Not after the Thanos punch, the Falcon punch. But as far as like the aftermath of everything that happened outside of the prison, when Rhodey asked Nick Fury how did Frank find out about the suit or where to get the suit, Nick Fury clearly lied and just said, we're working on that. But Frank and Hydra Supreme both got arrested, Ghost and Zemo both got away, but that prison truck, it really didn't make it too far. Because Widow and Bucky, they're not done with Frank yet. And Hydra Supreme made it clear that while he was in the chopper talking to Baron Zemo, he mentioned that him and Baron Zemo had exchanged quite a bit of information about some rather big plans that they have coming up that include Frank Castle. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Hope you either got more clarity or learned something new, or you're like me and you're even more excited about Marvel Legacy and you're looking under every single rock just to see what's next around the corner. Because Marvel is back, man. Like, they are sewing up their narratives tight, airtight. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you can catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, later.